Greetings from the North Carolina chapter of the Wildlife Society. I'm Bob Hazel, the chapter historian, and the date is March 22, 2004. And we are in Siler City, in the Piedmont region of North Carolina, to record another in a series of interviews that's part of a program called Collecting or Celebrating Our Wildlife Conservation Heritage. It's both, it's collecting and celebrating. And we use the letters COWCH to describe that, so it's become known as the COWCH program. The purpose of this program is to record the history of wildlife conservation and management in North Carolina as told firsthand by the people who made it happen, the pioneers in the conservation efforts in this state. And today, we are interviewing Mr. Cape Carnes, who's one of those people. Cape is a retired fisheries biologist who has had a long and distinguished career dating from the early years of the Wildlife Resources Program in his state. And during this interview, Cape will share with us his experiences, the activities, the highlights, the accomplishments, problems, and whatever else he chooses to tell us about. So, Cape, why don't you begin by telling us something about your background, where you came from, where you grew up, how you got into the fisheries profession and so forth, and just take it from there.
Okay, thank you, Bob. My name is William Capers Carnes, and
I knew it was something like that, but I wasn't
yeah,
sure what.
but when I was born in Hamlet, North Carolina, and my father was an engineer on the railroad. My mother was a homemaker, and I have two brothers and a sister. And I was born in 1929. I graduated high school in Hamlet in 1947. At the time, you had to, when you got 18, you had to go into service for 3 years. I volunteered for the Navy for 4 years. Spent time in the Philippines and in Korea and Japan. And when the Korean War broke out, they kept me another year. So I spent 5 years in service in the military. And when I got out, it was either go to work or go to college.
Right.
So I went to college, and I went to state and was in the wildlife conservation. I got a BS degree in '56 and got my MS. And I guess it came in '59, but I had to go to work in August the 1st in '58. I went to work for the Wildlife Commission. I had resumes out in Florida and Texas and Georgia, and they didn't pay very much. North Carolina paid more than they did, and the starting salary for a fish biologist with a master's degree was $4,100 a year in 1958. And so I went to work because I am a native North Carolinian. I decided to stay in the state and went to work with the Wildlife Commission, the North Carolina Wildlife Commission. And my first jobs were on some reservoir sampling that the state was doing, and we camped out at job sites, and then they called me into the office and told me to go report to District 5 because the biologist here was leaving, and I inherited District 5, which turned out to be, at that time, mainly farm pond work, because pond owners needed information about fish population they had, because the Soil Conservation Service did a lot of pushing to get farm ponds going, and they did survey work for them, and the federal government also stocked the pond. And that's when the problems started. You ended up with vegetation problems, which the biologists had to go and check out and eventually tell the farmer how to manage his pond. And it was a continuous battle.
Yeah, I remember when I came to work in 1950, that was SCS's primary activity, really.
That's right.
Farm ponds were the big thing.
And I did a lot of farm pond work. So I seined a lot of them, and with any help I could find, and I must have done 150 a year, and we only could do them in the summertime. And then we would do our reservoir sampling in the fall of the year, along about September, and at the latter part of the summer. And I would assist on that. In those days, there was a biologist in each district.
Yeah.
There were 9 districts, and if you needed real help, you had to get your friend, your neighbor, next district to come help you. And I got a lot of work done in the mountains. Guys kept calling me to come up there. And I lived on Highway 64, which was a thoroughfare to Raleigh from the mountain. There was no interstates. And they would stop by and visit with me, and then want me to come help them, and they'd come help me. And when I was helping with the reservoirs, it was all the way over to Lake Wiley, over on the other side of Charlotte, and the Yadkin chain. And that was a lot of fun, a lot of hard work, but we eventually got it done. And then in the summer months, we could get a college boys hired as helpers to help you. So you had to do a lot of work in the summertime, because otherwise you would be doing it by yourself. And then in 1960, we started an inventory of all the streams in North Carolina to determine the fish populations that were present. But nobody knew. And we set up a grid system of a particular watershed, and then a system of how we were going to sample the streams when they crossed the grid marks. And we'd take out in May with our summer helpers, and then we would, when they went to school, and the colleges then started in September. And so we could work them June, July, and August. And we camped out everywhere we went on sampling. And generally at the stream site, or some counties had a wildlife club, and they would let us camp in their facility or their picnic shelter. And we would stay at that particular site until the commuting got too far, and then we would move further downstream or upstream, whichever way we were going. It all depended on the rainfall too, and water levels. You know, you had to pay attention to the weather so that you wouldn't be rained out. If you rained out in one section, you could always go to another watershed and still continue your work. And collect the samples, preserve them, and you know, a lot of the larger suckers, we just had to lay them out there on the bank and say, okay, we'll take these two, and these two look different, and then too we could get the correct names for them. But the minnows, we preserved all of those. They were very difficult to key out in the keys. Dig out the pharyngeal teeth, the teeth in the throat, you know, and clean them in Clorox so you could count them, and then take them to Duke University or for Chapel Hill to some professor to take a look at and evaluate how we were doing on them. And eventually, I think all the specimens ended up in the museum, and there were some incorrect identifications that we made, but we did find the boys in District 3 working on their stream. Let's see, it was over in the Eno River. They picked up the Roanoke bass, which we didn't recognize.
Nobody knew about that.
Nobody knew about it. Everybody was calling it the red eye, because you know, the red eye occurs in the foothills in North Carolina, and they thought maybe they were down here too, but it turned out to be the Roanoke bass, and that was a species that we weren't familiar with. And but it gave us a baseline data of what we had, and it also told us where there was points of pollution. And the Stream Sanitation Committee, which was an agency of the Department of Water Resources,
Right.
would send out these containers that we had to send, go collect the water from certain sites and mail back in to the agency, and along with some oxygen and pH levels and things like this, the chemistry, water chemistry on site. And I did that 2 or 3 years, once a month. About 6 samples I'd have to go take on the Howe and the deep rivers and some of the tributaries. And we had our baseline data that we could look and there were some real bad streams. I'm surprised that the way the population density occurred, say in Chapel Hill, for one of the streams coming out of there, Morgan Creek, that stream did maintain itself for a long, long, long time with the population growth occurring. And Hall River was always a bad river, but with the growth, it never really got any worse. It just, I guess technology was keeping up with with the increase, and I think eventually they're getting ahead. The streams are beginning to get clean, and you will have spills nowadays I read about, and they'll kill a few fish, and then hurricanes and things like this come ashore, and they do kill a lot of fish down east. But
you feel like we're making real progress.
I think we're making real progress, because about in the late '60s, the environmental movement got started.
Yeah.
And prior to that time, people that see dead fish, they didn't think much about it.
That's right.
And then after that after the environmental movement got started, they started reporting those fish kills. And the fish division, particularly the biologist, he had a new project to work on, because he had to go look at the fish kill, see what it really was, if it was just 5 fish or if it was 5,000 fish. And then if it was a large fish kill, you had to call a group in, to go pick up and evaluate. And then I forgot which agency now. It was a Stream Sanitation Committee, but they had grown to another agency, changed their names, and now Department of Water Resources, I guess, still has a group of biologists that go out and do the work. But we still have to go pick up the dead fish, because the fish biologists got to have a strong stomach. And and you can. I remember they had a big fish kill on the Yadkin River in 1969, and I mean it killed a long streak of the river. And we had a lot of enforcement officers picking up fish, and a lot of guys were throwing up. And there sat 3 fish biologists. I was one of them. And mounds, I'm talking about mounds of dead fish. I think the director, Mr. Patton, flew out and came over. And Ted Dossett was an education rep, and he took a picture of me sitting there, eating a can of sardines for lunch, drinking a Pepsi, and eating sardines and crackers, with dead fish everywhere.
I think I brought Patton up there.
That's right, you was a pilot, Bob, I forgot about that. But I never will forget that fish kill. Great day in the morning.
Well, the other thing was, those things interrupted your other work.
Oh, sure.
You had to go right then.
That's right, and you had to drop everything you were doing and go do that, because it doesn't take a fish long in the summertime to decompose.
Yep.
And then you end up with just a little skeleton, and it's very difficult to recover much money on a bunch of skeletons.
That's right.
We didn't receive any of the money, but on the fine and or fish replacement costs. We did get the fish replacement costs. And the same thing is that the reservoir work we did, with my management programs, we were stock fish, either game fish if we thought they needed some another predator in there, or had a forage fish like threadfin shad. And fish like threadfin shad spawn once a year. They come upstream, and we could catch them below a hot water plant, and in the spring of the year. And you had to be there to get them when they were there, and ship them out to the reservoir, different reservoirs for a forage, and/or like striped bass. North Carolina operated a striped bass hatchery for, oh Lord, way back in the early 1900s.
Oh yeah.
And then fish biologists considered it a salt mine, because when you went up there, if you got 4 or 5 hours sleep, and they weren't consecutive hours, you did good, because when the striped bass started running, there was constant flow of traffic into the fish hatchery, and we were assigned different weeks to go work up there, and they bring the fish in. We would take the ovaries out of the females, put them in a pan with a little water. Then the fisherman had to bring a male in with him, because we were buying the eggs from the fishermen on the river. That was our method of collecting the striped bass. And then we would get sperm from the male, milk him down, and stir the fish up, the eggs up, and then decant the water off, and then have a little measuring cup that hold 100,000 eggs, and we'd put in a jar. And then these jars are around an aquarium with water flowing all the time, because striped bass eggs are semi-buoyant, and they have to have a current to maintain buoyancy. And we would put these in a jar with a water flow. And the striped bass eggs are real small when it first starts, and then once it's fertilized and water and it's laid, then they swell up, and they water harden, and they get about the size of a pencil eraser when they water harden. Takes about an hour to do that, and just as soon as you start to get one that's water hardened and say, I can go to bed and get some sleep, here comes another fisherman in with more fish, and it's a real rat race during that season, and the season generally lasts from about mid-April to mid-May. And that has priority over a lot of the other jobs, because the fish are there, you better be there to get them. And then when they're gone, you can go back to your other work.
But you camped right there the whole time you were on duty.
There was living quarters in the hatchery.
Yeah.
But you've been to the Weldon hatchery.
Yeah.
It's a hatchery on the side of the river, and it's in a small town. There's a large town nearby, Roanoke Rapids. And I guess people must have nothing to do in the afternoon after supper, and they would come down, and there would be a crowd at that hatchery all the time. And with 2 or 3 fish biologists trying to do their work, it was miserable. But particularly when you don't get much sleep. And then in the mornings, there wasn't too many fish coming into the hatchery during the daytime. Mostly it was at night, right at supper time, up through the night till daybreak, and then it kind of petered off. And then there would be school children coming, and you have to give them a tour through the hatchery, explain the system to them. Plus the fact there were other states flying into Roanoke Rapids with a biologist to collect fish. We would trade fish with different states. And you always had to get fish up, call the people, tell them their fish will be ready in a few days, because the striped bass fry have a little yolk sac on them, and in about 6 or 7 days that's gone, and then they begin to eat each other. And so you have to get them out and shipped, and get them dispersed into the water where they're going to be stocked. And the way to do that is put them in a little plastic bag with a little bit of water and some oxygen, seal it up, put them in a styrofoam box, pasteboard box, tape it up, and fly them out to wherever they got to go. and we require the people to fly in and come get their fish and take them out. We've even shipped fish to Russia.
Is it?
Back in the 60s, yes sir. And I don't know what we got from them, but it must have been something going somewhere. And but we did ship a lot of fish to Oklahoma, Texas, Missouri, Pennsylvania, New York, and we get catfish, you know, blue catfish or muskie, walleye, which we don't have to stock here. Now there are populations of walleye in Gaston, and there are some walleye in Lake Tillery. People don't know about it, but there's some fishermen that know they go fishing in January and February and they can catch some walleye. And but in the spring of the year we also have to get white bass and striped bass, and we pick those up in the Roanoke River. And then we started using hormone to ovulate the fish to make them do what we wanted them to do, and that way the hatchery began to tone down. It was not an erratic situation, work situation. We could have a smooth situation.
No pressure.
No pressures.
Yeah.
We could inject a hormone and the fish would come off in 24 hours. We use this, and it made life a lot easier for the hatchery personnel.
But now, was that hatchery there at one point pretty much the salvation of the striped bass?
Yes,
I
and
thought it was,
because
yeah.
we gave fish to the Fish and Wildlife Service, and they had a hatchery further down thing, and they would rear up to fingerlings, to sub-adults and stock, you know, 6-inch fish. And all of our stockings were fry, but all the fry stockings, they really never did take hold. You had to rear them things up to fingerling, you know, about 1 inch long. And then we got striped bass populations established in some of the reservoirs in this state. And we had one season, I remember I had to go to Fayetteville and work for 30 days down there at the hatchery, and that was rearing fingerlings. And then when you stocked those, you had a real good chance of establishing a fish population. And then they started some states, and we were to having cross white bass, striped bass cross, and I had white bass in this district, so I'd have to catch the white bass males. And then Dan River come out of Virginia up into North Carolina, and stripers were running out of Carr Reservoir, and that was my responsibility to go up there and collect the stripers and get the females doing the spawning run. And some days they were real cooperative. We used electrofishing gear to get them, and then some days just work all day long trying to get 4 or 5. But things have worked out, and the guys are much more efficient now than we were, so I guess that program is really going. There's been some other program, Bob, that we undertook, and that was city lakes. Open them to fishing. And we talked to a bunch of cities, and then we sample a city lake and find out what the fish population looked like, and if it was poor growth according to other growth rates of fish population in nearby, we would add a 3 fish head again for food supply. And then from that there grew a program for kids to fish, to learn how to fish. And we would stock park ponds with catfish, artificially feed them, you know, feed them trap chow, and floating pellets, you know. And we had automatic feeders to do that, and kids could go to park ponds from the different counties and or cities and catch fish. And they got a program now, since I've retired, where fishing tackle companies would donate fishing tackle to the Wildlife Commission, and the kids could come, not have tackle, and get tackle and go fishing,
Mhm.
and turn it back in, you know.
Mhm.
And they have a lot of freebies to give them, some tackle and some keychains and literature, and it's teaching those kids how to fish, and then they will in turn be a fisherman when they grow up, and job
Good
security
program.
they call it.
Yeah, well, it's a
But,
good program, yeah.
it's really a good program. And there was two things I'd like to bring, well, I mentioned the environmental movement, but in the beginning, the guy would launch his boat anywhere he could find a place to launch it. The Wildlife Commission had an engineering division, and one biologist prior to the establishment of the resident biologists in a district. We had one fellow that would go around the state looking for access area sites, and then our engineering division would build a ramp for this fisherman and a little parking lot. And you never saw many boats on the lake except a wooden boat. And then in the early 60s, fiberglass.
Yeah.
Well, there was a boating boom that would not quit. And first thing you knew, there was boats everywhere on the lakes. And I think, and you probably know the answers to this, I don't recall, but the legislature started some laws about what was public waters and what was not public waters,
Mhm.
and who could fish at these access areas. You had to have a fishing license if you were going to fish at them originally, we thought. And then they made it a law, they had to register the boats, and if the boat was registered, they could launch their boat on the fishing access area. And in the beginning, the pleasure boaters were pushing the fishermen off of the access area, and then that was all we could ever hear. And I'm so fortunate that I got a lot of it, but I expect the enforcement officers
They
got 10 times more gripes
Yeah.
than I did. But that was real boom.
Mhm.
And we developed a boating division in the Wildlife Commission. And then in the mid-80s, the fish division inherited the boating division. And we incorporated them within our division. And that was just some momentum that I had, plus a lot more headaches too, because trying to get the men and the concrete and everything to show up at a site at a certain day without pouring down rain to build this access area, that logistics was horrible.
Mhm.
But we had no equipment to start with, and then eventually the money came through from the boating boom, you know, and we bought bulldozers, dump trucks, backhoes, road graders, everything you needed to maintain an access area. And once it, maintenance on it is one thing, and then we had, the boating boys had to clean these access areas. And if you put a trash can on an access area, you were inviting a dump
Oh, yeah.
situation. And I was, you know, just lots of miserable things. I remember an area on the Yadkin River down from Fort Church. And there's just a little finger pier sticking out in the river, you know, and when they had floods, trees come down and took it out, you know, the boys had to put it back. It was just so a man could launch his boat and have a little pier to tie it to and get off and get back. Vandals and their four-wheelers and their winches would pull the pier up on the concrete ramp, build them a nice fire for that night, have a party down there. And I told my men not to replace it, but politics.
Oh, yeah.
I had
If you
to
didn't, you
replace it.
caught it, yeah.
That's right, I caught it. So you had to listen to certain things that you didn't enjoy a lot of times, but no big deal. Just keep doing it.
Yep.
And we had one access area, you couldn't keep a sign on it to save your life. And signs, I don't know why they invite target practice, but they do. And then there's one site that we didn't have problems with a target practice. I don't know, these people just did not like a sign. They would pull it up and throw it in the river.